Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in to all my little talks and stories about my life that I had with my narc. Today I want to talk about an extension of what narcissists are like with your family. I did put out a video about what my narc did to his mom and the way he was with my family. And the way he didn't want to hang out with them. And there were early signs of that. Now that, I think about it and think of the things that he said to me, and they were hurtful. I wouldn't allow myself to get hurt by them at the time, but it's still hurtful now. So my narc was married before, and he explained to me that the real, when their relationship with his first wife fell apart, it was when her grandmother died, when his first wife's grandmother had died, and his wife was she had a lot of grief. She went into deep grief over it. I guess the grandmother lived in a different state. She didn't get to see her. Anyway, it was a real strain on their relationship. And I'm like, well, her grandmother died. If you've never experienced the death of a family member before, and usually your grandparents are the first ones, the first one can be quite traumatic. And I remember having that conversation with him. But a couple years later, my father got sick. He had cancer, and he fought it for about a year before he died. But right before my father died, my narc came up to me and he told me how worried he was that the same thing was going to happen to me that happened to his first wife, where she would, get caught up in her grief, and, our relationship would be lost. And, that's not how it's supposed to go. I'm supposed to have, because we were married, we had just gotten married, and this is something that a husband is supposed to comfort you. You're about to lose your father, my parent, and instead of comforting me, he's like talking about how worried he is that I might get too sad and and not be able to give full attention to him, which is insane. Right? So I remember having to really kind of almost be stronger than I should have been when my father died. I tried not to actually even cry too hard around my husband, like around my narc, because I didn't want him to get upset with me. And that's not right. That a real husband and a normal person should be able to comfort you in these times. And the thing is, you can get over your grief a lot, with a good support system and family and things like that. But he was not even around. And still to this day, my family talks about how, because remember when I told you in one of my previous videos how my narc would, not come to my family's house for gatherings, or he would show up right at the dinner time, and not socialize beforehand. He did the same thing to my father's funeral, because my father had two funerals, one here and one, in his hometown. And the one here, he was late. He had missed my eulogy and a couple of other things. Like, he showed up in the middle of the funeral. And I was actually I was sitting with my brother and my sister, and I I guess I didn't know who was there and who was not because I had traveled to the place with my family, but everyone else really noticed how late he was. And then a few months later, we had my father's funeral. We went to his hometown, and everyone flew there. And it was really quite a big event. And after we went to dinner, and my mother was extremely distraught. My mother, she had only been with one man her whole life, and that was my father, and they were married for 40 years. And so we were really rallying around her because she was having such a hard time. And I just remember we were at the dinner after the funeral, and my mom said, "This is it," like she pointed and looked at everyone around. "This is our family now. Like, we're down one." And I remember sitting there, and it was just like any other family gathering. Everyone was there except for my husband. And this is a time where you really need your husband there. But of course he wasn't there because he was too busy. He was too busy taking care of the garden, the house, the animals, busy working on YouTube, busy, when absolutely everybody else, everyone has jobs, everyone works, everyone else, like my sister's husband, and she had 3 kids, and they traveled across the country to go to this, and my brother and his wife flew, and we were all there except for my husband. And I remember, like, my mom's crying, and she says, "We're down one. This is what's left of our family." I'm like, wait, and I said my husband's name. He's not here. And everyone just kind of like looked at me going, we all know he doesn't count because they didn't care, right? And I was only married a year at that point. And it was really apparent to my family how selfish he was. But of course, I was still in like a honeymoon stage. I wasn't being love bombed anymore, but I was still in honeymoon stage. I had just gotten married a few months earlier, and it was just another example, of how selfish and self-righteous narcissists are. And even when it's the most tragic time that you've had in your life so far, they're not going to support you because it takes away from them, right? Like, that's just how unbelievably selfish they are. And I can see it now. But I think I was just too blinded then, because for a full year after my discard, I was always second guessing whether or not he was a narcissist. I was too, shell shocked from the discard. I was so not ready for it. And of course, him having a new supply within, like, I know he had already had her lined up when he discarded me, but when you're second guessing yourself, because my narcissist was so, a covert narcissist. He was never ever angry. He never yelled at me and did these things, but instead he did other things. And because he wasn't this grandiose narcissist, I had a lot of doubt for a long time about whether or not he was one. And so as, I think back and I can have a clear head about what my relationship really was like with him and the true pain that he caused me, that I had to endure like it was normal when it wasn't. And him not being there for me when my father died, and the only thing him saying is that, well, I hope you don't grieve because, it'll be hard on our relationship. That's just insane. And I was actually trying to comfort him at the time, saying, don't worry, I'm going to be okay if my father dies. And then I had to do most of my grieving and crying in private. Because I thought I was protecting my marriage. But really, he was selfishly worried about me, his fuel source. Fuel for him is what he was worried about. So knowing things like that and looking back on my relationship with him, it gives a little bit of comfort to know that he was a narcissist. Even though he didn't always yell at me, his actions were so loud. He didn't have to yell at me. And the pain is just as bad. And the memory of it is really bad as well. So I'm healing from moments like that I had in my life that I have to share with my narc. And unfortunately, I have 1,000 stories like that now. I was with him for 7 years. So I want to thank everyone for listening to me talk. I hope wherever you are out there that you're finding solace and your tribe with this channel as we all heal and find happiness post Narcissist.